We have this tension between the critique that alternative medicine isn't based on science and conventional medicine has no soul. So I feel like what you and I are trying to do is bring the two of those together so that the medicine we have is both clinical and has a little bit of soul to it.
Exactly.
Hi, and welcome back to episode 2 of season 2 of the Alternative Flight Plan podcast. I'm Dr. Kristin Barnes, coming at you from Port Townsend, Washington. And we explore the healing paths that your regular medical provider might not tell you about. With a couple decades of naval service, I have a deep appreciation for creativity and adaptability being key to solving complex problems, especially when it comes to healthcare. So without further ado, let's introduce my guest for today, who is Dr. Erica Zelfand, naturopathic doctor from Oregon. She's the medical director at Rise Up Journeys, lead educator with Inner Trek, and executive director of Right to Heal, among many other things. And we can unpack a little bit more of that when we start chatting. Dr. Z bridges conventional, holistic, and indigenous medical systems to help people reclaim their lives. And she's deeply invested in using a variety of different alternative modalities to guide people back to health, as well as teaching other healthcare providers to do the same. So today, Dr. Z and I, we got lots of things that we can unpack, but maybe we'll just start with things like naturopathic medicine, how each of us are bringing an alternative medicine, or as we say, the original medicine into a conventional world. We might also talk a little bit about psychedelic medicine. I know it's near and dear to both our hearts. So without further ado, to use the cheesy naval aviator speak, we're going to taxi to the catapult and get airborne. Welcome, Dr. Erica Zelfand.
Thank you for having me. Sweet to be here.
Thanks so much. I've been listening and reading up on some of the media that you've got out there, and which is why I ended up inviting you to be on the show in the first place. You are deeply involved in lots of things that I am as well. So let's just start by just a basic who you are and what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you were reading my intro, I had this. I'm going to name imposter syndrome that came up. I've been out of medical school for 13 years. I think I'm pretty darn good at what I do, but all of the feedback at least gives me that message. And I had this imposter syndrome voice come in as you were reading my intro, and the imposter syndrome voice said, "Well, you're a master of none because you do too many things." And so, I'm just going to name that. Sometimes by naming it, you give it less power. So let's reframe. Reframe is I'm a multi-passionate, multi-talented person, and I get bored easily. So I'm always kind of seeking out ways to integrate what's there, kind of challenge the status quo, see what connections can be made, and see what kind of sparks of inspiration can be ignited. And for me, that has really come together with blending my knowledge of naturopathic medicine and my experience as a naturopathic physician with doing more therapies that support the soul. We talk about mind-body medicine so much, but we're missing a third piece there, of our milking stool. Milking stool has 3 legs, or the trinity, if you will, and it's the soul. Right? And we would touch upon it in naturopathic medical school, which I think is more than most conventional medical programs can say. But after I graduated from medical school, once I had my practice, I realized, wow, this is the layer that I actually feel like a lot of people need healing on. And I'm not sure that I have a whole lot of tools that help me touch that layer. And yada, 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 that's where the psychedelic work came in.
I was reading an article on Substack today about that very topic of trying to reach the soul in helping patients heal, and we have this tension between the critique that alternative medicine isn't based on science and conventional medicine has no soul. So I feel like what you and I are trying to do is bring the two of those together so that the medicine we have is both clinical and has a little bit of soul to it.
Exactly. And I think there can be a merging of the two. I don't think they have to live on opposite ends of this tug of war. I think that's just exhausting for everyone.
Well, it is a little bit, and it doesn't address what's going on with a lot of people. I mean, I don't know a single person who comes in and is simply a case of a stubbed toe. Like there's always a person attached to the toe. Um, so, what got you into naturopathic medicine in the first place? Because it's a kind of it's a really unique field.
It is. It is, and it is not for the faint of heart, I gotta say, to enter this profession. So, like many healers, I'm kind of the archetype or the trope of the wounded healer. I grew up in Northeast USA where Lyme disease is rampant, and when I was about 14 years old, I got sick with a urinary tract infection and mono at the same time. And then it's sort of that classic never well since case. And so through my adolescence and early adulthood, I spent a lot of time in doctors' offices. Infectious disease, neurology, general, alternative medicine, homeopaths, herbalists, energy healers, shamanic healers. And so I really, my dear parents funded a very expensive education for me in a survey of healing modalities and healing systems. And towards the end of my undergraduate career, and I was double majoring in literature and religious studies with a minor in Russian language, so nothing having to do with medicine. I was applying for graduate programs in literature, thought I maybe would someday become a professor of some sort. I pictured myself with the blazer with like the leather circles over the elbows. Like I thought that would be a really nice life for myself. And a friend of mine essentially said like, hey, you gotta pull your head out of your backside here and realize that you're supposed to be a doctor. And it was just one of those comments that it just spun me. It was like a slap across the face. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know anything about medicine. She's like, no, you do actually. And that's what you're supposed to be doing. And you know how to sit with people who are having a hard time and you know how to give them compassion and boss them around in a way that makes them feel like you're not bossing them around and you're supposed to be a doctor. And it was just one of those comments that stayed with me. And as I thought about it, I was like, well, the conventional healing system has just let me down so hard. I don't know. Maybe I could change it from within, but man, I don't know. And then I met a naturopathic physician and they told me a little bit about what they did and said, wow, that sounds fascinating. Can I shadow you in your clinic? So thank you to Janine Malcolm in Boulder, Colorado, who I shadowed and said, wow, this really seems like this could be a path for me here. And yada, 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 here we are.
Here we are. Hey, I didn't plan on asking this, but it just popped into my head. And I may not get the answer I expect. I don't know. It's a fun part of doing these conversations. I listened to one of your podcasts that you did, and you mentioned that you are first-generation American with parents who are Russian immigrants. I'm curious if that background in of having it's not unique. Like Russia's huge. Like there's lots of Russians, but within the context of American culture, I think is when I get it. Did that background inform your path at all? And what did you bring from that lineage?
Absolutely. I think absolutely it did, because my Eastern European roots, my parents' attitude towards health was different than the attitude of my longer American than us. I mean, we're Americans, but we're kind of fresh. My friends' parents had very different attitudes towards healing than my parents did. So, and now I understand that actually the way that naturopathic physicians in the United States practice, we actually practice a lot like medical doctors in Europe. We're not all that different. But when we compare ourselves to USA allopathic physicians, we are different. And so things like growing up, my parents weren't really afraid of chickenpox. They weren't really so freaked out if I got a fever every once in a while. And they were more willing to consider something like, oh, well, maybe she needs some energetic healing. And then taking me to a guy who didn't use the word shaman, but, spoke Russian and chain smoked and saw me in his living room. Like, They were willing to explore the gamut more so than I think some of my, um, longer term American friends' parents would have been. There was
Oh
also
my
that
gosh.
piece.
Well, if nothing else, I think the curiosity opens us up to having some really interesting experiences. Some of them that can be deeply healing, and some of them that are just entertaining. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um, I'm curious when you're having the conversation with people who are coming to a naturopath the first time. I still get people, which is funny because there are a lot of naturopaths in Washington and the Seattle area. And yet I still find people that are coming to naturopaths for the first time and they're asking me about what it is. I'm curious what your take is on what is a naturopath and how are we different and how are you the same?
Yeah. Well, to ruffle some feathers here, I am an naturopathic physician, but I don't use that word in my marketing
Okay.
because people don't know what that is. And the analogy was given to me by our colleague, Marnie Loomis, who's a dear, dear human. And she said, it's like people are hungry for baked bread with tomato sauce and cheese on top. But if you say, I've got pizza, they're going to walk right by you and they're going to be like, I don't know what that is. That sounds weird, but I'm really craving some saucy, cheesy bread, right? And you're like, but I've got pizza. And they're like, you're weird, lady. I don't know what that is, right? And so kind of to skip that whole stage where people say, I don't understand what you do. And then they ask me a bunch of unintentionally really insulting questions like, how are you different than a real doctor? I skip it and I just say, I'm a family doctor. I specialize in integrative and natural medicine. And they're like, oh my God, where have you been my whole life? I gotta sign up. My sister's gotta see you. My brother's gotta see you. Da, 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 da. And it's like, okay, great. Come on in. And and I'm licensed in Oregon where I have a really broad scope of practice and a really broad formulary. I'll hold a DEA license, prescribe testosterone, ketamine, those sorts of things. And, as the educational piece rolls out, it's like, what I do is called naturopathic medicine. Oh, I've heard of that, but I didn't realize that you could know your backside from your elbow. So, oh yeah, we do. So kind of meeting, and we talk so much about meeting the patient where they're at, right? And that's where our patients are at, is they're looking for us, but they don't know what we're called. So we got to use language that they understand without being deceptive, right? I don't say I'm Erica Zelfand, MD, or, I say I went to a naturopathic medical school. I am a real doctor. I do integrative and natural medicine alongside conventional. Oh, okay. That's a very different conversation.
Maybe that's the piece that's missing with the advocacy that we have for naturopathic medicine in America. It's very frustrating to try to explain to people what that is, but I'm totally going to steal your metaphor of cheesy bread with sauce. That's perfect.
Yeah. Cheesy bread
Yeah.
with sauce is delicious, whether we call it pizza or not.
I love pizza too. I did recently add a section on my website for functional medicine, and I asked a patient just last week, how'd you find me? And she's like, I was searching for functional medicine. I'm like, all right, all right, all right. That's not how I identify necessarily, but if the lingo gets them where they need to be, then I'm not opposed to that. And it meets with my ideals of morality and not lying. So, in theogenic medicine, let's just dive in. Maybe people are going to start when they start listening to my podcast, think that's all I talk about, but it's one of my favorite topics. I've been involved. I did the curriculum through IPI in Boulder, and I was working on actually getting licensed in Oregon. And decided that would, I live in Port Townsend, that's ridiculous. Um, but I think, especially with my experience as a veteran and watching other veterans flail, and many of them end their life by suicide, it feels like a really promising medicine. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit in terms of what does psychedelic medicine have to offer? How are you using it? And what are the downsides? Understanding that those are three distinct parts of the conversation. So let's just dive into psychedelics.
Oh my gosh. Well, when I opened my practice in 2013 in Beaverton, Oregon, I thought that I was opening a family medical practice that was going to have a strong emphasis on mamas and babies. So like a lot of help in those reproductive years and in early childhood. And I did do quite a bit of that. But despite all of the marketing efforts I made, actually what my practice was chock full of, it was people with depression, anxiety, addiction, and other mood imbalances. Or people who, even if I couldn't put a clinical diagnosis on them, they just weren't really happy with their lives. And that's when I quickly realized, man, I got a really good education. I learned all about, the conventional medications, the psychiatric drugs. I learned about herbal medicine. I learned about nutrition. I learned about homeopathy. There's still a layer here I can't get to for most of these patients. And that was the soul level, or some kind of cohesion between mind, body, spirit, that I'm also just gonna admit I'm not that good at homeopathy. Maybe homeopathy can get there, but unless it's like a very, very obvious case that hits me over the head, like it's not my strong suit. So I just felt like I need a tool that I don't have, and I don't even know what that tool is, right? It was like, I need the saucy, cheesy bread, and I didn't know that it was called Psychedelics. I didn't know that it was psilocybin mushroom pizza, right? Like I just knew that I was missing something. And I'm really stubborn and I'm a good study. And also I was new in business. I wasn't going to turn all this business away. I needed to, I needed to pay the rent and keep the lights on. And I wanted to help all these people. And so early on in my practice, there was just this deep dive into mental health. But if you pull the string of mental health, with even more than a gentle tug, you're going to get to spirituality. It's just going to happen. And then I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do here? Like become a cult leader? Like, no. Okay. So how am I going to help these people? And then just, by virtue of having a personal life and my own existential crises of being a new doctor in practice, I found myself in a living room in Portland, Oregon, drinking ayahuasca, like you do. Trying to get some clarity for my own personal life, right? But I love my work. I'm a little bit of a workaholic. So of course my first trip was all about healing and work and how to help my patients. And it was like, I want to understand why I'm seeing rainbows and fractals and snakes right now. I have to understand how this is working on my brain. And could there be something here for my patients? And, that kicked off a process of, months, maybe even years before I ever even opened my mouth and said anything about this in the medical realm. But oftentimes there is an unseen layer to pathology. And I'm going to start sounding really weird here. So get ready.
Okay, bring it on. I love weird.
Sometimes that unseen layer could be like a negative core belief. It could be a lie that we learned in childhood that we started believing about ourselves and then we played it out, Sometimes that unseen thing could be karmic. Maybe it's something from a past life. If you believe in past lives, even if you don't, maybe it's something there. Maybe it's in your ancestral line. For example, I am the descendant of Jewish survivors of World War II and the Holocaust. That plays out in my life a lot. You think that has anything to do with the fact that I'm pretty neurotic? I'm pretty sure it does, right? So, or maybe it's just collective. Some of us are very empathetic and we just pick up the energy or the pain that's in the field around us, right? So whatever that invisible thing is, it can play out in our physical bodies. It can play out in our emotions. It can play out in our thinking patterns. And Prozac is just not going to help you heal it that much, It might be a tool as part of a comprehensive healing plan that includes other modalities that helps you, right? But I needed more tools to get to that invisible layer, because that invisible layer is a very significant obstacle to healing for people. And I'm not a shaman. So I need a tool I'm not magic. I need a tool that is magic. And for me now, 13 years out from medical school, psychedelic medicines are in that toolkit for me. And they help me help my patients in layers that I can't without them, that I really can't go there without psychedelics. with a lot of these patients.
So you're in Oregon, and lots of people are watching Oregon and Colorado and are fascinated and curious about the state of how the regulation and the program is working there. So how is it being a regulated provider in Oregon?
It's juicy. It's frustrating. I spend a lot of the year in Mexico, and that's actually where I do most of the healing work. I do hold a license as a facilitator in Oregon. I do teach facilitation in the Oregon model and the Colorado model. So our graduates can practice in either state. And, I keep reminding myself Rome wasn't built in a day. So, I remember when my dad brought home our first computer. My dad's an engineer. It was a big, big hulking thing, and not a lot of people had computers, right? They were really expensive. And now it's like the average person, I think, owns at least two, right? You got your computer and your phone and your tablet, right? That's 3 computers, and it's kind of normalized and they're accessible. So that's kind of how I think of the Oregon model, is like, it's the first computer. It's the first, that first color TV that was so expensive that people, we're getting there slowly. I have some pain points with the Oregon model, which is part of why I work internationally. One is the price. It's for me to be a facilitator in Oregon. The facilitator license is $2,000 a year. Just to give you a comparison, I pay about $450 a year for my medical license, my naturopathic medical license. My DEA license, which allows me to prescribe controlled substances, is $800 every, I think, 3 years. So it's a pretty expensive license. And then I need to find a venue. I have to go to a licensed venue. To be a licensed venue, it's $10,000 a year for the license. And that's just for the license. Then there are all these rules about, you have to have this equipment and that, and it has to be like this kind of windows and blah, blah, blah. And then the medicine is licensed. And then the people selling the medicine have to have a license. And guess who pays for all of those licensing fees? And then to have a license in Oregon, you have to write a social equity plan, which essentially demonstrates, here's how I'm going to give my stuff away for free to people who are low income or marginalized demographic. Well, there is no such thing as free. So if I'm giving away my services for free, actually someone's paying for them. And who is it? It's the other people who are paying for their services. So it's expensive. There's no, I'm just, that's the elephant in the room. It's really expensive. The same people who could afford to do underground work are the people who can afford to do the legal above ground work right now. There are programs, there are nonprofits. Shout out to Cherie Eckert Foundation, for example, for helping people, have subsidized treatments. But I don't think this means that the program is doomed. I think it means they're rolling out a new program. And stuff takes time and money, and we're gonna mess it up, and we're gonna fix things along the way. The other pain point for me with Oregon is that there's a maximum dose that we can give of psilocybin, which is 50 milligrams of psilocybin. For the average person, 50 milligrams is a huge dose, and we don't need to go that high. I work with a lot of people who are on psychiatric medications, however. And those people often need bigger doses. Not always, but often we need to give them bigger doses to kind of override the suppressive effects of the medications they're on. And so I go above 50 milligrams with a lot of those clients. And how disappointing would it be for somebody to fly to Oregon, get a hotel room, pay these thousands of dollars, and then they don't launch? It could be pretty devastating. So, Oregon's great. It's not the final product. And, in the meantime, I've got a foot in that world and a foot in other places in the world where I can just help people with less red tape and less overhead for everybody.
Yeah.
So that's how it's going.
Well, I've got experience doing things here locally, but one of the first journeys I ever did was in Costa Rica, and I wouldn't have been able to. I did an Iboga journey, and I wouldn't have been able to access that. It would be hard to get in the United States even now, but so I am
or hard to get
very
safely.
Yeah, well, that's a great
Yeah.
point, because that is definitely a medicine that you wanna be very, very careful with, but having access to that, even outside the United States, I was very grateful for that. So, tell us a little bit more about what you do in Mexico and how that fits in with what you do at home in Oregon.
Yeah. So in Mexico, through Rise Up Journeys, I am the medical director and director of retreats. We do psilocybin healing retreats, and occasionally we do peyote healing retreats as well. Um, we work with local medicine carriers and those who feel inspired to share their medicine and be fairly compensated for it. Um, and essentially, we help people get unstuck. A lot of people are feeling stuck. Um, Maybe they've got a clinical diagnosis, or maybe they don't check enough boxes for DSM criteria for us to put like a label on them, but they're just not living their best lives, you know, not living their happiest, most meaningful existence. And we help people connect with that. We do mostly group retreats. We do offer one-on-ones, but the reason that people don't want to come on a group retreat is exactly why they need to come on a group retreat, which is
Okay.
so many of us, especially in our culture, United States, Canada culture, when we're in pain, we tend to contract around the pain and isolate. And there's only so much healing that we're going to be able to do in isolation. There is a time for isolation and kind of focusing in on oneself. Um, And there's also a time for healing in a way in which you are witnessed, and in a way in which you are held, and a way in which you're witnessing other people heal. And so much of our wounding is relational. Other people hurt us. We hurt other people. We felt alone and unseen. We felt like we were too big or too loud, whatever that is. And then to be able to confront that wounding in a container of other people who are also confronting their wounding is pretty powerful. It's pretty magical. And that's where the importance of trained facilitators who can hold that space and ground that space and not let, every wild horse run every which way with their drama story. But um, essentially, we help people connect with themselves and with others through the work that we do.
I have about a 3-year relationship with psychedelics now. I started back in 2022, and so my trajectory has taken me through what could arguably be a very common experience where this is the greatest thing since, sliced bread to, "Oh my god, this stuff is terrifying," to, "Oh my god, maybe there's a happy middle ground where this stuff can be amazing, if it's done in a really safe way." I was hoping you would share, because this is a really important conversation to have about how to do these things safely. I was hoping you would share with us a little bit about your experience that you had that was less than fun.
Oh, yeah. You're talking about my bad trip?
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm not allowed to use that word, which is exactly why I used it. Um,
but that's
so,
what it was. I think it's okay to name it that. Yeah.
right? And it really brings up, there's so much about, I was going to say, there's so much about our culture that's toxic, but I think the word toxic is toxic. So it's like,
Yeah.
there's this, I'm just going to say, like, toxic positivity, where like every horrible thing that happens to us, like we have to think of it as a blessing, or like we can't use the word bad to describe it. Because bad is a moralistic judgment, and who are we to judge? And I'm the end user. That's who I am, I'm the person living in this body having this experience. So, by bad trip, when I say I had a bad trip, what I mean is I had a psychedelic experience that landed in my nervous system as a traumatic experience. So I felt and continue to feel that I was harmed. Harm was done to me by a psychedelic experience. Um, there was that initial injury of what happened for me, it was ayahuasca. And then there was this secondary injury of being denied when I told people this is what happened, of no such thing as bad trips. Don't be angry. The medicine knows what it's doing. everybody gets the trip that they need, you know, ba, 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 ba. And it's like, if I told you that I was raped, would you tell me that? Or if I told you that I was in a car accident and broke my leg, would you say that to me? Like, seriously? And so now, mind you, my relationship with psychedelics didn't stop there. And it's like, well, why in God's name would you go back? Right?
That was definitely one of the questions I have. I
Right?
mean, I've had similar experiences that were overloading my nervous system, and yet I continue to go back. I know what my reasons are. I'm curious what your reasons are.
Well, one of the reasons was actually peer pressure.
Oh,
And there's a lot of that in the psychedelic space also, along with a lot of pill shaming of conventional modalities. I really, really, really wanted a Xanax or two after that experience. And the people I was with were very shaming around that. They're like, no, 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 don't ever medicate your feelings. It's like, okay. Unless they're like making me think I need to jump off a bridge, maybe. No. But it didn't get that bad. But so part of why I went back was all of these people telling me like, hey, there's no such thing as bad trips. Like the medicine gives you what you need, la la la. The next trip might be totally different, which is true. I mean, for me, this was only my third time taking ayahuasca, and each time was very different. So, okay, I went back, and then the same thing started happening again. The same kind of going down this spiral of like the alleyway to bad trip land. It wasn't as horrific as the first time, but it was the same flavor. And I just felt so defeated by the whole thing. And then I started yelling at the medicine, and people are like, you can't yell at the medicine. But I'm like, listen, okay? I'm an Ashkenazi Jew. I was raised by Soviets. I grew up in Massachusetts. I think it's my right to argue with God. So I'm going to argue with ayahuasca here. So I started yelling at her, and I was like, listen, can I swear on your podcast?
abso-fucking-lutely.
Okay. I was like, listen, you fucking bitch. Like, I don't know who the hell you think you are. You come into my sacred vessel, you come into my body, you come into my brain, and you trash the place. Like, what the actual fuck do you think you're doing right now? I kind of like dug my heels in. And she was just like, this is how I work. This is what I do. And you came back to ceremony and you drank me. You signed up for this. I was like, oh. So ayahuasca taught me boundaries. And ayahuasca taught me, there's that very, very cynical Dorothy Parker quote, believe people when they show you who they are. Right?
Yes.
It was like, ayahuasca showed me exactly how she was working, exactly who she is, and what her style is. And if I don't like her style, I don't have to come back. Right? But I didn't like her style, and I kept coming back. And it's like, oh, where else in my life do I do that? Who else in my life do I do that with? Where does that show up? I actually got a lot feistier and a lot bitchier after that experience, but it was and that's like medicine for me, right? There is this, and it's like, what's the most insulting thing you can call a woman? A bitch, right? What is a bitch? It's a female dog, right? Have you ever seen how a female dog behaves when you threaten one of her pups? That's actually but it's sacred. It's so important because if she doesn't do that, her puppies are going to get killed, right? And then there goes her whole line. That's very sacred, womanly, protectress energy. And that's what my bad trip taught me. So yeah, was there something good that came out of it? Sure. Is there something good that comes out of a car wreck where they have to amputate your leg? Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's probably a silver lining there too. Thank God. I don't mean to be like comparing one trauma to another, but there's always a silver lining. I've definitely been committed to grabbing every silver lining I can find from that experience. But I really would not wish on anyone the experience that I had, that I felt injured my nervous system, and that took me probably a good 8 years to really integrate and to heal from. I couldn't talk about, like, the way I'm talking about this right now on your podcast. I wouldn't have been able to do this, even 5 years after the fact. It took me a long time to integrate it. And ironically, it was peyote that helped me like really finalize that last chapter of healing. That after peyote ceremony, that I was like, okay, I think I'm done. I mean, I would have really done, but you know.
Well, God, thank you for sharing, first of all. I've had some experiences that I have not shared with anybody else but my closest circle, and a lot of it is shame that I'll be judged. Like, well, you did that willingly, it's your own fault, and like, but this isn't the way it was supposed to work out. So, having these conversations can be very challenging. I also think that one of the things and I've heard myself say these words, and I have since reconsidered, and I don't say them anymore. At least I hope I don't. Is that the medicine gives you everything you need? Like how do we even know that? Like where did we decide that that was a thing?
Right? What if we swapped out the medicine for life? Life gives you everything you need. Does that still feel true? Maybe.
Well, tell that to somebody who's been sexually assaulted, and I think they would argue that point. I had this conversation on my last episode with a man who has 3 daughters, all of whom they're grown now, but all of whom, when they were children, were sexually assaulted, raped, and his trauma was trying to deal with people that would tell him that everything is for a reason, and so it's like, no, everything is not for a reason; it just is. But I think, honoring that and allowing space for patients to, vocalize that is a big part of helping them deal with some of the things that they've got going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a lot of spiritual bypass that happens in the psychedelic world. And again, being raised by Soviets, um, I have just a different approach to things that really pisses some people off, and others love it. But I had a patient once who, for her, she was doing MDMA assisted therapy to work on childhood sexual trauma, and it was so clear to me and her therapist that she had just done leaps and bounds of progress after her MDMA therapy session. And at one point in her appointment with me, like a follow up, she got frustrated and she goes, "Yeah, but I don't know. I think I needed a higher dose." I'm like, "Why do you feel like you needed a higher dose of MDMA? It's clear you got like benefit out of it." She goes, "Yeah, but like, I know I'm supposed to go to this, like, I know I'm supposed to reach this point where I feel like the trauma was a blessing." And yeah, and like, so here's the thing is when your parents are from like Ukraine, Russia, and Moldova, you say things like, "Where'd you get that stupid idea?" And she just looked at me like as if I'd slapped her across the face. She's like, "Well, I mean, isn't that what I'm like?" She thought that that's what the goal is, that the goal of treatment is to get to a place where you see it all as perfect. Everything happened as it should have. What a blessing that I was repeatedly raped by my foster family father. No, it doesn't. It can be that. It is that for many people. And how wonderful for them. It doesn't have to be that. And if you don't get to that place, you've still done a lot of healing and growth, and you still get to have an awesome life. You don't owe anybody your forgiveness. You don't owe any experience your acceptance. There's still a way to integrate it into your psyche and in your body and in your nervous system that lets you go ahead and have an awesome life, even though that horrible thing happened.
I think it just goes to show that even with psychedelics, there is no one size fits all. And we keep trying in our Western model to push people to a one size fits all, and it's just never going to work. And when are we going to learn?
It's not. And this is like my biggest frustration, or I have many biggest frustrations, but
okay.
But one frustration I have is this attempt to, yes, like you said, shove this very vast healing modality into our very limited scope of understanding, where people say things, okay, do psychedelics treat depression? Do psychedelics treat obesity? Do psychedelics treat binge eating disorder? Do psychedelics treat TMJ? Do psychedelics treat migraines? And it's like, when you're a naturopathic physician, you know that that's just the wrong question, because all of these conditions are just symptoms of something deeper. And when you treat the whole person, when you treat the cause, it's like, yeah, sometimes after taking psychedelics, somebody will stop getting migraines, or they will lose a bunch of weight, or they won't have to have that gallbladder surgery or whatever, you know? But I think that's part of what makes naturopathic physicians so perfectly poised to be psychedelic facilitators, is because we get that.
Bingo. I have a good friend of mine. He was on the podcast last season, who is a facilitator in Oregon, and we both agree that of all the different letters that are out there, that perhaps the ND and NMD are uniquely suited to being able to do the integration that is required, because we do look at things like sleep and nutrition and healthy relationships and healthy boundaries and healthy environments that are free of mold and all the things. So
Right.
I hope to see more naturopaths get interested in, if not doing this, then at least learning about it so that they can talk to their patients about it.
I appreciate that point. And I think another way in which naturopaths are well situated to be wielding this very powerful tool is in assessing when it's actually necessary. So there's that old saying that when you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if the hammer in your hand is psychedelics and that's the only tool you've got, you're going to want to use it a lot. Whereas when you have a naturopathic philosophy and our naturopathic pharmacopoeia, I think we're in a good place to assess, is this actually the tool that's needed? So, for example, somebody comes in, I've had depression for 10 years. I've been on medication for 10 years. I'm still depressed, blah, 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 blah. And we're talking to this person and you notice like, oh, wow, their hair is really thin. It's like, yeah, has anyone ever checked your thyroid? Right. And then we run a thyroid panel and it's like, you might not need psilocybin. You might just need some levothyroxine, right? Or, vitamin D deficiency, or how many people have an occult celiac disease? Everyone I've caught celiac disease in, I was like the fifth doctor they saw. Everyone missed it, right? Because they didn't have the classic weight loss bellyache situation. And then it's like, well, we treat the celiac disease and they don't have anxiety anymore. And, if we had given them LSD, they might have had some great insights about their life. I don't doubt that it would have been beneficial to them in some way, but they'd still have celiac disease, which increases their risk of all-cause mortality by 500%. And they'd still have breakthrough anxiety probably, right? So our naturopathic philosophy and our naturopathic toolkit, I think, helps prevent us from getting too gung-ho about just, mushrooms for everyone or MDMA for everyone, and be a little more discerning in how we use those really powerful medicines.
Yeah, I mean, I am continually reminded every time I go into the medicine myself, how potent these things are and how careful we need to be when discussing this with clients and patients about the potential benefits, but the potential risks as well. Yeah. So, um, I'm curious, since you do a lot of your work in Mexico, have you had a chance to work with Indigenous providers or Indigenous practitioners, or at least have conversations with them about how they do the medicine or provide the medicine, and then compare that with how we're doing it in the US?
Yeah. Um, it's a completely different approach and a completely different model. The first time that I took mushrooms in with an indigenous provider, it was in Huautla de Jimenez in the state of Oaxaca. And I'm not saying this to disparage the practitioner. I'm just saying very different, to illuminate the differences here. She didn't ask what my last name was. She didn't ask if I had any drug allergies. She didn't ask if I was on any medications. She didn't ask, what's your intention? What's your goal in doing this? There was no integration whatsoever. It was like, hi, what time does your bus arrive? I'll pick you up in a taxi. Um, and then we went in this house that was still being built, but they ran out of money. So light bulbs were hanging off the ceilings and there was an altar covered in Jesus stuff. And it was essentially like a plate of mushrooms covered in dirt And she was like, okay, sit down, shut up, eat your mushrooms, do your work, you know? And then she sang beautiful music, right? Totally different experience than what you would get, say, in a Oregon licensed psilocybin service center. I also got to say, like, I have 12 years in the Portland, Oregon area, so some of our lingo is a little different. So for example, we have this term trauma informed. Indigenous medicine is not trauma informed. And is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? It's a thing. It is what it is, right? So for certain people, that's really refreshing because they're like, great, can we just take the medicine and get to work already? And for other people, they're like, whoa, 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 this is not a safe container. I don't feel grounded. I don't, it varies. There are different ways of doing this medicine because people need different things. And there's a lot that we can learn from both systems. And I've learned a lot from the kind of more clinical way of doing things, and I've learned a lot from the more indigenous way of doing things. The indigenous way of doing things has taught me to trust the medicine more than the conventional approach has. Of that, these substances have spirits, that these are spirits want they want what's good. They're working in kind of in a beneficial way. And there are still ways in which I know that I don't know. Like one of the last ceremonies we did where there was an Indigenous provider there, she kept lighting incense. And we had a patient on that retreat who was actively in treatment for lung cancer and expressed, I don't do smoke. Please don't do smoke. And this practitioner kept lighting incense. And I thought, okay, maybe this is a language barrier. So, I went and told her kind of sternly, but also directly, like, stop lighting incense. We have someone here with lung cancer. And she said, I'm sorry. I'm trying to do it as far away from her as possible, but it's like, the energy isn't moving, and like I have to make an offering to the wind. And this is like the easiest, like I could make a fire, but that would be more smoke. So I'm doing incense because it's like the least amount of smoke I can do to make this offering. And this is like really important that we make this offering. And it's like, okay, they didn't teach me that one in Oregon. That's not something that I was taught how to do or to even think about, And it's still a little bit of like a leap of understanding for me where I'm like, I don't get that, but that's why I've got you on the team so that you can do that part and I can do the medical screening part.
Well, I think it opens the door that we just don't know. We each have our own traditions. I consider myself fairly metaphysical and esoteric, but at the same time, I'm still a very clinical Western person. So I like our model, and I think it works well for our population. That said, I really enjoyed my experience in Costa Rica. That was way less clinical and way more let's make an offering to the wind. But maybe that's the beauty of psychedelics, is that there's unlimited possibilities for how somebody can approach that medicine.
Sure. Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point of like reading the room and knowing your audience. Also, the indigenous models. I'm not going to say model because there are many, but the ones that I've experienced, both with psilocybin mushrooms, as well as peyote, there's no integration. Like there's no, okay, and then we all come together and talk about what that was like or what your intention is moving forward or how is it going, we're going to do a Zoom call a week later. None of that. And part of that is because in these cultures, working with these medicines is just part of the culture. And in our culture, a lot of us are doing this in secret, right? Saying we're going on vacation to Mexico and, we're actually doing an exorcism and fighting for our souls. But then we go back to the office and pretend like we didn't, People coming from a setting in which, these medicines are taken in a way that isn't associated with shame or illegal activity, but rather is just like, no, this is your duty. You got to clean shop once in a while. they can then go home and talk to their neighbor about what the experience was like, or even talk to their children about it without having to keep it a secret. And so maybe they don't need this formal integration call on Zoom for 2 hours a week after, the ceremony, the way that we might, coming from where we're coming from.
Yeah. Well, it would be nice if psychedelics were more widely accepted in our culture and part of the culture. It's just I I don't know why, in the big scheme of the universe with a capital U, how it's happened this way. But I I often say that it's an exciting time to be alive, because we get to experience these things and open our perceptions, beyond just healing, even just, like you mentioned at the very beginning, is like helping people find their best life. Like, who wouldn't want that? We're here. Let's do it.
Yeah. Well, who wouldn't want that is someone who is scared of the cost of achieving their best life. Because sometimes we know, oh, I'm gonna have to change this thing, or oh, I'm gonna have to quit that job or break up with this person or disappoint my mother or whatever the thing is. And that's scary. So maybe I'll just get comfortable being uncomfortable. And maybe I just need to work on being okay with not living my best life. And that is a path for some people. But, the nonprofit organization that I founded, it's called Right to Heal. And I named it that for a reason, because I feel like people need that reminder that when you make the choice to heal, you've made the right choice. And it doesn't mean that it's the easy choice. And it doesn't mean that you're not, you might disappoint some people. You might even hurt some people along the way. You still made the right choice. And coming back to that, this is the right choice, even though it's hard, even though it hurts sometimes. This is the path. This is the path. Choose healing.
Thank you. Thank you for that reminder. I come from a perspective, and I forget that there's lots of different perspectives, but I come from the perspective of somebody who's done a lot of work, and I've experienced a really vital life, and I'm like, man, this is awesome. Who wouldn't want this? Um, it's scary. I was scared when I first started. Anyway, all right. So we are just about at the end of our time. I am really grateful for this conversation. So thank you for that. I'm very grateful to have you on. Before we go, if you could please just share with people how they can find you.
Yeah. Well, my website is drzelfand.com. But my last name can be a little tricky. So if that doesn't suit you, you can check us out at righttoheal.com. As well as riseupjourneys.com. And all roads lead to Erica Zelfand. We'll connect in one form or another. So thanks for leaning in with me.
All right, thanks. And if you're on the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State, you can find me in Port Townsend at Meridian Passage Wellness. I'm also at Element 7 Wellness in Paulsbo if you're on the Kitsap Peninsula. Or you can just find me at www.meridianpassagewellness.com and on all the socials, Instagram, LinkedIn, what else? Facebook, like all the things.
Facebook, so please, TikTok, there's X.
YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, like, subscribe, and most importantly, would you please share? If you think this message hit you, maybe it'll hit somebody else. And we want to share the different ways that you can find healing. All right, so that's all we have time for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.